Okay, good. Well, thank you so much for having me here. Yes, I have held 12 C-suite roles. I've worked in or with 52 companies, and I'm now up to 105 companies that I've led go-to-market workshops with. And I joined my first startup in 1985. So I succumb to the same condition that all of you do, which is I'm passionate about early stage companies and how you help them succeed. And let me give you a little context for how I came to this GTM focus. What happened was when I moved from Silicon Valley, where I'd spent nearly 20 years to New England, I spent the better part of 10 years when I first got back here being asked by equity investors to step in and run some of their portfolio companies. And over time, I began to ask the question, what did they do or not do before I showed up that made it necessary for me to be brought in? And what I concluded was they failed to get go to market properly understood right. We'll come back to what properly understood means, but that was the core point. And that really shows up then in what I consider to be a far too rarely asked question of why are there not more great companies? Especially since there's no lack of the four items showing on this slide. And my conclusion as I reflected on all this was that too many companies adopt flawed go-to-market practices that creates blind spots. And if they're left unaddressed, those blind spots can easily turn into black holes. Now, the go-to-market strategy affects everything, value inflection point in your company's life. And for you folks as young companies, the first thing it's going to impact is how you select and pursue your first products. And if you're fortunate enough to get past that, or already are, then your go-to-market strategy will determine the success or failure of your current products. And in parallel, as you're dealing with investors, they're going to be scrutinizing your GTM strategies, just as strategic partners would be as well. So this affects every element of your company's existence. Now, I mentioned flawed GTM practices. What I'd like to do in the next few slides is highlight some of the high costs that come from pursuing such flawed practices. These are the negative slides, if you will. This is the price you pay if you get it wrong. Now, I did co-led a webinar some years ago, and I had a poll question, and this is what the poll question was. And I got to tell you, I have two reactions every time I look at this slide, which is it's so discouraging. And at the same time, it's so typical. And think about what it says. Almost 2/3 of the respondents said their companies didn't ask hard questions. And over half of the companies didn't do the right things vis-a-vis product assumptions, business model assumptions, or understanding customer needs. This is the mindset outcomes. These are the habits that come out of having the wrong mindset. There's a second problem when you get go-to-market wrong, which is that you equate planning with strategy. So the best definition of planning I've ever heard, and it can be in the form of you have PowerPoints, you have financial models, you have Gantt charts, you have, if you're really ancient, you write business plans. So all these different things. It's a laudable list of internal management activities that are under your control. And the reason that that has no value strategically is that none of that has a theory of advantage. What do I mean by that? Strategy done right, to quote Roger Martin, is an integrated set of choices. And it says, we're going to play on this field, not that field. And on this field, this is how we are going to win. So the definition of a theory of advantage says we are going to develop a set of must-have capabilities as a company. Those are the inputs that give you an unfair advantage in the marketplace. And the output is a unique value proposition that's differentiated from anyone else that's playing anything close to your space. And that combination, input, output, must have capabilities, unique value proposition that's differentiated from everyone else. That's what allows you to have the ability to compel the desired actions that you want from customers. We'll talk about how to get there as we work our way through this presentation. Now, I love the title of this slide because it's an intentional poke at everybody that I present to, especially startups, because we all, again, I've been there, done that. We all succumb to this tendency to think that the marketplace cares about your company, your technology, or your products. They don't. Period. Full stop. Unless you help them get their jobs done better. So what are two of the mistakes that can be fatal? If you live in company solution space instead of customer needs space, and you have some lousy mental habits. Let me get a little more granular. One of the common problems that startups have is they love evangelizing their solutions. And they do it and they underplay and underinvest in understanding customer needs. So it's like the street corner preacher. You know, you're out there proselytizing and people think of how often you listen to a street corner preacher. You know, you don't. And so that's the problem. People tune you out. And Bill, going back to this planning versus strategy differentiation, it is so easy to be seduced by the fake certainty of plans that, again, have no theory of advantage. And the third point is not a repeat of the first point, because it's not just that you need to understand customer needs. You need to rigorously define them. And that's an art form that we'll talk more about in a few slides as well. When you do that, you're busy folk. When you fail to do those things right, you're living in company solution space. Our company can do this. We have these products, this technology. We provide these features, these benefits. It's you. It's like me. It doesn't work. Now, the mental habits that power that oftentimes begin with a lack of curiosity. When you have a lack, these are kind of harsh words, but you know, this is like the wake up slide to make sure you haven't slipped into some bad and lousy habits. If you lack the curiosity, you're not going to ask questions enough and dig deeply enough. And Hayek won a Nobel Prize in economics in 1974 for what he called the knowledge problem. And in layman's language, the knowledge problem is knowledge exists in disparate pieces, tidbits, if you will, disconnected. It can be inside your company, it can be outside your company in the marketplace, broadly defined. They can be anywhere. Your competitors can have some, you can have some, you don't have to have the same ones. And you have to solve the knowledge problem for the following reason. You as a startup have no economic power. You're tiny. Your assets are tiny. You have little to few to any customers. You don't have a lot of cash in the bank. You need an insight that is so different that no one else has it yet. Mike Maples is one of the famous seed investors in Silicon Valley. And his comment is, you have to go into the future, leave the present, go into the future, gain an insight that no one else has about what that future will hold, bring it back to the present, and then act on it. People will think you're crazy if it's really an interesting insight, because the definition of what will get you to be successful is it'll be non-consensus, which means people won't agree with you initially. And secondly, it has to be right. You'll know immediately if it's non-consensus because people will say, "What the heck are you thinking?" But the proving yourself right, that takes time. So that's not an immediate reaction. So non-consensus and right insights solve the knowledge problem and put those disparate pieces together in some unique combination that gives you an advantage that others don't have. And how do you get there? How do you not get there? Is you lack intellectual honesty. This phrase of intellectual honesty is actually from the title of an article in the MIT Sloan Management Review that you really should check out. It's January of 23. One of the authors is named Jeff Dyer and Nathan Furr. Jeff Dyer was one of the authors of the Innovator's DNA article that got a lot of publicity 10 or 15 years ago. Another great one for getting insights on mental habits that give you an advantage. So intellectual honesty, here's how I described, there's a lot of talk these days about psychological safety. I think it's overdone, frankly, or misunderstood. It's probably a combination of both. And what I wrote in a recent article that's on LinkedIn was intellectual honesty about the state of the company enables psychological safety at the personal employee level, the combination of which powers the building of an organization-wide sense of urgency. So intellectual honesty means you face the realities you're dealing with as you solve the knowledge problem, building on a curiosity mindset. And failure to get GTM right means you're screwing up on all three of those points. So don't do that. When you do those things poorly, you end up with these kind of outcomes. And this is another one. I mean, you can find endless studies on failed numbers. The generally accepted range is something to the tune of 70% of new products fail. Think about that. 70% fail. My goodness, that's just terrible. So here's my provocative question as we finish up the GTM bad perspective. When I talk to startup company executives, I find, I say, look, 70% will flop or fail outright. And the problem is close to 100% of you think you're in the other 30%. There's some serious cognitive dissonance in that. And what you need to do as your angst-driven moment every day of the week, week in and week out, is keep asking yourself, what basis do I have for believing that I have proven I'm actually in the 30% success rate, not the 70% failure rate? So with all that loveliness, let's now pivot to a positive perspective. And let's begin by asking, what is GTM? Peter Drucker, in one of his many famous quotes, he provides the context. He says, look, the only reason for a company to exist is to create customers. And GTM, properly understood, I argue, is a unified field theory of business. Others have called it revenue R&D, and others have said yet it connects your company strategy to your customer outcomes. Here's the most interesting thing that I uncovered in recent years. GTM efforts, and people have said, well, what does GTM mean? Most people think of go-to-market as meaning commercialization. So starting 6 or 12 months before a product launch and continuing all thereafter. And I'm going to argue that if you only start thinking about the whole set of GTM issues at that point, you're likely going to have a really difficult time succeeding. And when I first got the inkling to this last insight, when I was working with some Abbott Diagnostic alumni 20 some years ago, 25, 30 years ago, and they were with Abbott back in the 70s and 80s when it was the rocket ship in the medical products area, stunningly successful. And it sent a whole slew of executives off to run various startups over time. And what they did, and then subsequently I talked to someone who was at Genentech in the early days, and what they did She described how they married a technologist and a marketing person on every new potential project. Literally, she described how she was in the next cube from the technologist. So at the point that there was a raw, unproven technology and an unverified hypothesis about an unmet market need, they had begun a tug of war dialogue that would never end. How, what's going on with the technology? Are we making progress there? What are we learning about the market and the opportunities there? Well, how do those two things come together? So a tug of war dialogue that never ended until you either killed the project because it lacked commercial potential or you retired a successful product. So I use GTM intentionally starting at this point because it helps you stay focused as executives on the point that you have got to constantly be looking for an angle about how go-to-market works. It's all about going to market. And we'll talk about what you have to do before you actually get to that 6 to 12 months prior to commercial launch. So where do you actually start? You start with having the right mindset. Now, I came up with this cascade almost 3 years ago when I was preparing a global talk and trying to say, how do you articulate what I was struggling to articulate? And here we go. Your goal is to build a great and enduring company. There's two metrics that will determine whether you achieve that outcome. Have you delivered dominant valuations and dominant operating performance? Now, who are the parties that will determine whether you realize those two outcomes? It's investors, corporate partners, and customers. And here's the rub. You have no direct control over any of those three groups. That means you, as executives, are in the persuasion business. And you have to persuade them to care enough to invest, partner, and buy as you navigate strategic transaction due diligence with investors and partners and marketplace diligence scrutiny with customers. And my argument is, again, beginning back when you have raw early stage stuff all the way forward, having robust go-to-market strategies and outcomes is how you will persuade them to care. So there's three secrets, I would argue. The first is you need to adopt a needs-first view of the market. You need to avoid a solution-first view of the market. And then you need to organize for growth once you have agreed as a team on those needs. Let's get, again, a little more granular. For the needs first, these are some of the most important questions that you can keep asking yourself as a team. What needs are you trying to satisfy for which customers? And are they the right needs? And as you identify needs, are you doing that based on rigorously defining them around the customer's job to be done? Having done that, does your whole team agree on the top three customer profiles and each of their top three unmet needs? If you put this in like just embedded in your head and constantly ask these questions, you will go a long way toward getting go-to-market right, building a company. Now, what does it take to actually accomplish those secrets? I have I call it a product segment fitness. It's really a product market fitness, to use everybody else's lingo, an online survey. And it has 20 statements related to product segment fitness. And it asks for 2 responses for each of the 20 segments. And they begin, the first one is, we have explicitly defined ... And the second is, we have a shared understanding of ... So imagine markets, explicitly defined and shared understanding of, main users of your product, explicitly defined and shared understanding of, their jobs, the outcomes they want, and on down the line. So take what's on the previous slide, answer these statements favorably. So you can say, we strongly agree we've done each of these two things. And you will get out of that, you will get a clarity and common language as your team. Now, what I'm going to do on this and the next 3 slides after this is I'm going to offer you some tools, jobs to be done tools to help you get there. Jobs to be done has actually been around for 35, 40 years as a concept. It is not generally well broadly spread. You hear a lot of talk about it in certain circles, but not broadly enough. The core idea here is customers hire a product to get a job done. And they will continue to hire that product as long as it helps them get their job done better than anything else out there. And they'll stop hiring it the minute that is no longer true. So the late, great Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen said, the job, not the customer, is the fundamental unit of analysis. Think of what that is. It's different. We're all used to talking about customers. And again, now we're really getting at how do you get at uncovering customer needs? Well, you start with their job because the job is stable over time. Let me give you an example to make it come alive. Music. What's the job? The job is to gain pleasure from listening to music. Now, it doesn't change. That job doesn't change whether the solution you used was an LP back in the day, a cassette tape, a CD, or streaming. It also doesn't change. I love music. I've got 74,000 songs on my iTunes Match account, and it's a cross-section of everything from punk to classical to sacred to country to jazz to blues, some of the greatest albums of each genre over time. My kids wouldn't ever have almost any of that selection of songs on their playlist. They have rap, no small amount of rap. You'll never find a single rap song. Of all the collections I've got, 74,000, you won't find a rap song on my 74,000. Now, that doesn't change the job. Their job is to gain pleasure from listening to music just like it's mine, even though what we listen to is very different. And that then leads you to conclude that the markets are defined not around products, but around groups of people trying to get a job done. There is a November 2021 article by Steve Blank that you should check out. And he writes about the importance of a jobs to be done lens in market definition. He specifically notes how the lean startup methodology does not have a market definition step. And he goes on to say that you are then pursuing market definition, customer need discovery, and value proposition development all at the same time. And that creates a recursive process, I'm now reading his words, in which the team is simultaneously iterating on market definition, customer needs, and value proposition with no logical way to exit. The circular loop, as one changes and impacts the other, can cause companies to churn, pivot, and fail. And he says, you really should start with defining the market first and doing it around the job to be done. Now, we frequently, and we're all primarily used to the idea of thinking about customers as they respond. We have features, they respond with the benefits to that. And what the job mindset does is it says, look, focus on the desired outcomes. How do they measure success when trying to get their job done? What are they trying to accomplish? It's not the tasks they're doing. It's what they're trying to accomplish. And those outcomes are their needs. Now, given how radical things have gotten, think of what the iPhone did for music in terms of just blowing up all the standard definitions of how you listen to music. And that led, Tony Ulwick then says, you're not competing against a product, you're competing against the way a job gets done. And if you think about it that way, then the iPhone didn't change anything. It's just a new way to accomplish the same job. So this is how you can withstand industries getting blown up or surprises out of nowhere, which we see more and more than compared to what was in the past. And then you can segment customers based on the outcomes they're trying to. So it's an outcome-based segmentation, not a needs-based segmentation. So this is heavy. There's a bunch of heaviness on this slide, but I wanted to really kind of give you a bigger picture of the whole jobs to be done framework. So we've just started talking about an example of a job definition, and it's just not a simple task necessarily. It requires some real concentrated thinking. But the broader point is most products only get part of a job done. And so the question is, don't ask how, what job your product does. Ask what is the customer trying to get done? What job are they trying to get done? And I rattled off some dermatology clinical kinds of job steps. There was a whole 12 steps that I didn't get through all of them. But when you start to think about a job map that is solution agnostic, that doesn't have a single mention of any product or service that you folks might be developing in your company, but it's really trying to understand my customer wants to do this job, and this is how they go about doing it. That will begin to get you some really powerful insights. And the way you uncover things, so underneath each of these job steps, like I rattled off, when you begin to do customer needs discovery, this is such a tortured area. I mean, it's done poorly, frankly, by so many companies. You tend to lead with your solution. You tend to ask leading questions if you aren't actually talking about the solution. You know, it, then you try and lead with demographics or features. It's like nobody gives a damn about any of that stuff. So don't go there. What you need to do is when you come up with a map, this is one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. You you get on the phone with or a Zoom call or whatever with somebody after you have a straw man job map and these outcomes, and you're not asking them, you're asking them to talk about their job. Like if you're a dermatologist, what do you do when a patient shows up? And what do you do after they show up? And what do you do while they're still visiting? And what do you do in follow-up? And what you find is they start to really talk about their job and the outcomes that would allow them to do more of their job perfectly. And you discover things like, all right, I'm trying to accomplish this, and I'd sure like to minimize the time it takes for me to do it. Or when I do this job step, there's always these imperfections. And boy, I'd sure like to have the likelihood of those imperfections to be much lower. And so you come up with these outcomes that are their own words describing how they are trying to do their job if they could do it perfectly. And then of those outcomes, you can say, all right, for these conversations, which of those outcomes are most important and least satisfied? And then outcome-based segmentation instead of needs-based segmentation says there will be certain outcomes that for certain segments for whom most important and least satisfied will be a different set of answers than another outcome-based segment. And that's how you segment the market. And that's how you find the unique, unfair advantage that you can offer then a unique value proposition to. And when you have this kind of mindset, products generally, as a matter of observation, they evolve over time to getting an entire job done. But if you have the job map and the desired outcomes, you can actually envision a platform solution and begin to say, okay, we're here right now, and we're going to move over time to here. And so, Lisa, that may be part of the way you can think about it, which is, we're here right now, and we're small, we're early, we don't have necessarily everything nailed down, but you can start to imagine what a complete solution, platform solution would look like and what kind of capabilities you can develop to deliver that ultimate platform solution. And then you have the basis for a really a theory of advantage that can be strongly defended. So now the final part of this is really talking about the GTM Persuasion Framework. This goes back to me being an operating guy because it's like, what I didn't have when I was a CEO, I didn't have a tool that I could use as a framework to help me think about the right stuff at the right time. So it starts here. At the center of the persuasion framework, you've got a go-to-market strategy. And I argue that there's three hypotheses that you have to address in a specific order. You've got to start with the curiosity hypothesis, then the value hypothesis, and the growth hypothesis. And what that means in particular is you're constantly pursuing that actionable knowledge so that you can gain those insights that'll allow you to be differentiated. And then, no less important, really critical, you've got to upfront confirm you're creating value for customers. I mean, I can't tell you how many companies do a shallow job on one and do an even more shallow job on two, and somehow expect, well, if we just get to market number three, by God, it'll all work. And we'll figure it out when we get there. There's no small number of VCs that have said over the years that is the fastest way to failure. Pay attention. The jobs to be done is all about really getting number two right. So with those three hypotheses in mind, then what I do in this framework is I say, okay, we're assuming the three hypotheses, and now you can see that the outer circle on the previous slide is now the middle one. And now you start to get some of the particulars that you have to address because really when we're talking about go-to-market success, you have to be a GTM athlete. And so you have to have fitness regimens across the whole three areas. And that begins with organizational fitness that says, look, we're going to enable a learning culture. We're going to be forthright as we do it. We're going to look for inflection points on the horizon that can impact our outcomes. And we're going to make sure we validated the assumptions of our internal efforts so that we're not just wildly heading down a pathway and then realizing we forgot to test certain assumptions. For the product segment fitness, we're going to uncover the customer needs that allow us to drive growth and understand the assumptions there. And out of that, develop value propositions that will, as we said in the earlier slide, compel customers to act. And then with the business model fitness, we're going to allocate resources to build those must-have capabilities that competitors over time cannot or will not match. In this day and age, you've got to think about data, real-time interactive data, and how that impacts markets, and then sustain outcomes through business model innovations. And what does that mean in summary? It means you get the right organizational habits, you create offerings that deliver value, and then you retain some of that value as you go to market for your company. One of my buddies said this to me several years ago, and I just can't make it the last slide. This is not an implementation effort. This is living, breathing. This is the intensity that you all experience as startup entrepreneurs. You live this. And that's really then what I'd say is the parting thought I would offer you.